presentation now by Kees Terlo, who will present his paper on the many phases of regional identities, and the floor is yours.
Oh, thank you. I hope everybody hears me and sees me standing here and see what's written on my wall, hopefully. Perhaps you must, can you highlight me or something like that? Pin, I think. Yes, pin.
Gabi, can we?
Yes, I can perfectly see you and your presentation, Kees.
Great. As we noticed, the last year's things changed, and I decided a couple of weeks ago that I'll try to do my presentations in a different way. It's about the many phases of regional identities. It fits quite nicely, I think, in this session. The last map which was shown was about regions in Europe. As a geographer, I'm of course very much interested in regions, and it's quite nicely because these are more or less the horizontal regions, the regions of cooperation within Europe. And what's interesting, that in the previous discussions was mostly about the vertical dimension, about the role of regional parliaments in relation to the national parliament, in relation to the European Union and the institutions. Well, my main point is the many phases, to show the different perspectives one can have while looking on regional identity. I'm from the Utrecht University. They sent me this T-shirt a couple of weeks ago. In the sense we had our birthday, and this is, I think, quite interesting, quite useful to show my perspective on identity. There, of course, you can talk about identities, about individual identities, about identification with regions, or you can talk about the identity of regions. So my focus is not so on how many people wear the T-shirt, but what's written on the T-shirt. So my perspective, my discussion on regional identities are about the discourses which are used by regions, and of course that also has to do with identification. They have to receive that. Well, how are regional identities constructed, in my opinion? Well, first of all, they are a discourse in the sense that they are more than a narrative. They're a story about what the region is, but it positions the region. As a geographer, it positions itself in space, horizontally towards neighbors and vertically towards other levels, towards the elements. And that identity discourse is then constructed through these different types, through this layering. First of all, there are some positive elements which can be uploaded to that identity. The region of Baden-Württemberg, some think that the Mercedes factories are important, so that you can use that to construct your identity discourse. But of course, there are others who have a different opinion about it. So it's also not only about uploading positive elements, but also about exclusion of bad elements. So that is the linkage with the sub-regional level. And then there's, of course, especially in Europe, there's a lot of cooperation, a lot of alignment between similar neighbors. That's the cooperation dimension. But that's, of course, also opposed. You associate your region with favoring other regions. Regions you find interesting, you find similar to you, but there's also the opposition, the othering to other spaces. Perhaps Bavaria is not so well received in some of regional identity discourses on Baden-Württemberg, but I'm just freestyling more or less. And then there's, of course, the downloading of positive elements from the above regional level, which is mostly the national or the European level. You can see yourself as one of the motors of Europe, and then you're really downloading those positive elements, or you're constructing yourself, your identity as towards to distance yourself from the higher level. Of course, many Catalans see themselves as a regional identity which is very much focused on the autonomy towards, or even the independence towards the Spanish state. So this is my vision on the regional identity discourses. They are not constructed in isolation, but they are constructed in relation to other regions, to other regions and other layers, the local level and the national European level. And that, of course, can change, and there can be many different visions on it. So, what types of regional identity discourses can one distinguish? In my opinion, they are thick and thin. They are more territorial, more relational, and one can underpin that from several ways. I just, in this presentation, I'll use one source. I'm currently in urban geography, and this is Jane Jacobs, a representation of Jane Jacobs, who died a couple of years ago, who is seen as a kind of sacred saint of urban geography, who focused on the diversity, the importance of diversity in cities, completely against the planning in the 1960s in America and also in the Netherlands, where everything was to be divided functionally in spaces. And her point was that diversity in central areas, where she lived, by the way, that is one of the motors of urban life and urban development. She also wrote another book, a book in the later years in her life, Systems of Survival, which is about the moral backgrounds of these kind of processes. And she started out, and she thought, well, an important in social life is the trade mentality, the commercial ethics. That's about openness. It's about trusting each other. It's about individuality and other things. But then she did it through the analysis of many different sources. But she thought, well, that's not a complete picture. Of course, many others would agree. It's not only about trade, it's also about politics. So also the guardian dimension what was seen as an important moral system. So there's two systems. The one, the open, the territorial, let's say the horizontal dimension of how social life is organized, and the other one, more the vertical, the hierarchical, the territorial dimension. Well, this maps, I think, quite nicely on other sources where you talk about the distinction between different types of identities. There's a typology I created the first version like 10 years ago, and I'm currently writing a book, and I try to develop it a little bit more in a different way. Well, first of all, you have that territorial dimension, that vertical dimension, which is linked to ideas about community. The idea that the identity of the region in this case then is linked to the regional community. It's linked to livelihood, about distributing that everybody has a good life. It's about distribution. It's focused very much on the past, on the history, the historic roots. You could also, it's quite similar to the traditional views on the nation. Very much focused inwards on the relation within that territory, and this, which is very much rooted, it's linked to that, and it's very much focused on autonomy. It's linked a bit to one of the previous discussions about the idea of parochialism. Well, you can label that. It's about society and about space. It's about community. The ideas, the evaluation of change, and it's about the idea of how should freedom exist at a specific space, really completely bounded, and that is different from the relational or horizontal or thin perspective, which very much values individual actions about value, also values relations. There's very much an outward focus, a commercial focus, very much focus on not on the local level, on the parochial level, but on the global level, or at least European level, and very much focus on the future, and very much focus on individual freedom. So that gives a framework, a typology, to look a little bit further at, which is already my last, I was almost going to say slide, but